The Gothic spire of St. Patrick's Church in Anderston pierced the Glasgow skyline like a solemn blade, its stained glass windows catching the weak afternoon sun. It was the end of summer 2006, just the kind of quiet Wednesday where nothing seemed particularly urgent. Parishioners came and went. The choir's faint voices echoed through the cavernous nave. And no one, not a soul, suspected that beneath the very altar they worshipped at, a body was decaying in silence. Angelika Kluk was a bright 23-year-old university student from Poland, known for her intelligence, resilience, and gentle manner. She had been in Glasgow working for the summer to support her studies in Scandinavian literature. When she wasn't waitressing, she volunteered at St. Patrick's, helping Father Jerry Nugent with odd jobs around the church. She was staying on church property in modest accommodation and was well liked by the small religious community. So when Angelika vanished on Sunday, September 24, 2006, worry didn't take long to set in. She hadn't shown up for Mass, hadn't contacted her friends, and left behind a phone and belongings she never parted with. To Father Nugent, who had become almost a surrogate uncle to the young woman, the sudden absence seemed impossible. The police were called in. At first, the focus was routine, canvassing the area, checking hospitals, questioning church staff. But early on something felt off. Detectives noticed inconsistencies in the timeline. Church maintenance logs didn't match up. And then there was the matter of a new handyman. Quiet, middle-aged, calling himself Peter Tobin. Tobin had arrived just weeks earlier, claiming to be a devout Catholic in need of sanctuary and work. He'd been cleaning, painting, doing odd jobs under the supervision of Father Nugent. To the untrained eye, he seemed polite, maybe a little guarded. But to trained investigators, he gave off something else. Control, secrecy, manipulation. When officers attempted to locate Tobin after Angelika's disappearance, he was gone. Vanished overnight. His room was cleaned, stripped of prints, but they found blood, small specks near the doorway. The first chill went down a detective's spine. The next 72 hours would prove critical, the so-called golden hour of the investigation. Detective Inspector David Swindle, a seasoned officer with a specialty in violent crimes, took over the scene. His approach was methodical. Secure the premises, test every inch of the building, examine CCTV, identify Tobin's real identity. And what they discovered next would send a ripple of dread through the entire forensic team. By Thursday morning, the forensics team had sealed off St. Patrick's Church. From the pulpit to the crypts below, every inch was swept. Police dogs were brought in. Forensic luminol testing revealed traces of blood in places that had been recently cleaned, behind the confessional, along a mop bucket handle, and smeared faintly across the hinges of a trapdoor leading beneath the altar. It was there, beneath centuries-old wooden floorboards, in a dark, narrow void no more than 2 feet deep, that investigators found what no one wanted to believe. Body. Wrapped tightly in plastic sheeting, bound with duct tape, and hidden beneath discarded boards, the remains had begun to decompose. The smell, initially masked by incense and cleaning products, was now unmistakable. The crime scene team fell into a practiced rhythm, photographing, measuring, documenting every inch. It was a young woman, and though the face was swollen and unrecognizable, she wore clothing Angelika's roommate identified immediately. A specific green tank top, jeans with a small tear on the knee, and a silver crucifix necklace. The forensic pathologist confirmed it the next day. Dental records and DNA from a toothbrush found in her room matched. Angelika Kluk had been found. Her injuries were extensive. She had been beaten on the head with a blunt object, perhaps a hammer, and her ribs had been broken. There was evidence of sexual assault. Cause of death: asphyxiation. She'd been alive when she was wrapped and stuffed beneath the floorboards. The church that once offered sanctuary had become a tomb. Detective Swindle now had a murder investigation on his hands, and a vanished suspect who called himself Peter Tobin. But a fingerprint lifted from the mop handle broke the case wide open. Peter Tobin was an alias. His real name was Peter Britton Tobin, a convicted sex offender with a long, violent past. The church once whispered with prayer. Now it echoed with the rustle of crime scene tape, the soft snap of latex gloves, the hollow scrape of a crowbar lifting rotted floorboards. The darkness beneath the altar had given up its secret, a tightly bound, decomposing body left to rot beneath the feet of the faithful. Angelika Kluk was dead. The silver crucifix still clung to her neck, askew, nestled between purple bruising and the blackening of time. The sight hollowed out every officer in the room. But for D.I. David Swindle, it was fuel. Because whoever had done this hadn't just killed a girl. They had defiled the sacred. And they thought they could walk away from it. Peter Tobin. That was the name on the lips of everyone now. Only it wasn't his name, not really. When Swindle ran Tobin's fingerprints, what came back was far worse than he imagined. The man who called himself a handyman for the church was in fact a predator. His real identity, Peter Britton Tobin, was already etched in criminal databases across Britain. Convicted sex offender. Multiple prison stints. A ghost who kept changing his name, drifting from one alias to another, always just ahead of suspicion. And now, with Angelika's brutal murder, it seemed he'd finally gone too far. But Tobin was gone. He'd left Glasgow the very afternoon Angelika vanished, catching a train under yet another alias. Surveillance from the local station showed him boarding with nothing but a worn duffel bag and a faded expression. Calm, mechanical, almost bored. There was no sign of panic, no urgency. That meant one thing, premeditation. This wasn't rage. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a man who'd done this before. The net tightened. The manhunt widened. And then, 3 days later, a tip came from a hospital in Kent. A patient named James Kelly had been admitted for chest pains. Staff grew suspicious when the man refused to give a proper ID and became combative when questioned. When police arrived and fingerprinted him, the system lit up. It was Tobin. Swindle flew down that night. When he entered the sterile hospital room, Tobin barely looked up. His frame was gaunt, his hospital gown hanging from his shoulders like a wet cloth. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, unapologetic. "You're not walking away from this," Swindle said coldly. Tobin smiled. The trial that followed was as devastating as it was revealing. Every detail of Angelika's final hours was peeled back in agonizing layers. Testimony from the priest, her roommates, and the forensics team painted a horrific timeline. Tobin had lured her down into the church basement on the pretense of needing help. He had the keys. He knew the layout. And when the camera outside rotated away, during that 3-minute and 40-second blind spot, he attacked. The prosecution argued it was not just opportunity, but habit. While combing through Tobin's flat in Paisley, police uncovered items far more chilling than anyone had expected. Women's jewelry, clippings of missing person reports, and beneath loose floorboards, a knife roll with stained blades. But most disturbing of all was what they found buried in the garden of a previous home in Margate, Kent. 2 sets of remains. Children. The discovery shattered the scope of the investigation. Angelika, they now believed, was not Tobin's first victim. She was the latest in a string of killings that could stretch back decades. The media erupted. Headlines screamed of a serial predator hiding in plain sight. The church murderer. The gardener of death. But behind the frenzy, one family sat silently, crushed beneath the weight of finality. Debbie and Pat Boyd had spent those days searching for hope. Now they buried their daughter. The grief was unbearable. But even through the fog of mourning, they showed up for every court date. They listened to every horrific detail. And when the guilty verdict came, They held each other as the judge sentenced Peter Tobin to life in prison, never to be released. Justice, in its cold form, had arrived. But closure is a myth. In the years that followed, D.I. Swindle and his team would dig deeper into Tobin's past. With the help of criminal profilers and the National Crime Agency, they began what would be called Operation Anagram, an effort to piece together Tobin's fragmented life to match his movements to cold cases and missing women. Dozens of names surfaced. Too many families came forward, wondering if their vanished daughter, sister, or wife had crossed Tobin's path. In prison, Tobin never confessed. He taunted. He denied. He manipulated interviews, pretended illness, faked memory lapses. Each lie another twist of the knife for the families still searching. But one truth stood unshaken: Angelika's strength. She had traveled to Scotland to study, to explore, to live. She was vibrant, generous, and trusted the sanctuary of a church. Her death was a desecration. But in death, she unveiled the monster hiding in plain sight. Her case brought down a killer. And through the tireless work of forensic teams, detectives, and a heartbroken family unwilling to give up, her story reshaped the very foundation of how cold cases were investigated in the UK. Years later, when Peter Tobin died alone in prison, no family claimed his body. No service was held. His ashes were disposed of unceremoniously. Angelika was buried in her hometown, her grave blanketed with flowers from strangers across the world, people who had never met her but who now carried her story. A story of tragedy, yes, but also of resistance, family, of truth breaking through the silence of evil. And as the bells of St. Patrick's rang once more, it was not a song of sorrow, but one of remembrance, of justice, and of a light that refused